Hi everyone, I'm doing a bit of filming today in Comrie to celebrate 6 months since The Stone in My Pocket was published. And the reason I'm in Comrie, which some people will know, is that really the book um, is inspired by this little town in Scotland because I spent a lot of time here growing up. My parents had a caravan right in this space behind me there, that empty space. We had a little touring caravan when I was from about 11 to 15 maybe, and we spent every weekend up here. And because it's so etched in my mind, um, I ended up writing this book. And the fictional town of Dryton, really in my head, was mostly Comrie. One or two other places as well. But when I write about the main street and about the river and about the bookshop, it's the street, the main street in Comrie that I pictured. Um, So I'm wearing my sunglasses because it suddenly became very bright, and also I'm far too famous and I may be recognised here. Although I did ask permission to film and they said it was okay. So I'm going to show you a little bit of Comrie and show you some of the places that inspired me when I was describing the setting of the book. And you can see whether it aligned with what you imagined when you were reading it or not. Dryton should be somewhere you visit on a day trip, not somewhere you live, and not somewhere with haunted midnight wails and whatever that thing was. The village wasn't dilapidated enough, and there were no castles or crumbling mansions with mythical histories. Everyone with an idyllic front garden had it maintained for the Garden of the Year competition. There were twee little second-hand shops, and everyone who lived here always seemed cultishly happy. It was a village you'd see beside a model train set, and my family members were the shabby pieces that didn't match everything else. 5 years of practice was more than enough to have the walk from my house to the bus stop timed perfectly. Well, not an official bus stop, just a random lamppost on the other side of the bridge at the end of Durn Street that the school minibus stopped at. Some days it was late. It was never early. I inspected every house as I passed, waiting for the shadowed figure to appear at a lace-curtained window or float out from behind a perfectly manicured rosebush. Then, glancing over the street towards the book cover, I could tell it was different, like walking into your bedroom and knowing someone has moved something. I took a detour across the road. I could afford the extra 20 seconds. The book cover sat between a narrow little lane that led off to the river and the Bridge Hotel. That was a favourite with families and grannies visiting for the day and looking for a traditional bar lunch. Now, this is genuinely a strange coincidence that I named the main street in Dryton Durn Street in the novel, which was a wee bit of an Easter egg because the main character in my first book was called Durn. But now that I'm here, I've looked up, and this street is called Dunera or Dunera Street. That's weird. So this is the Catholic Church. In Comrie it's called St Margaret's. In the novel the church is called St Germain's, which weirdly is almost an anagram of Margaret, kind of, if you forget a few letters. Right as I started filming, someone decided to get the lawnmower out and cut the biggest garden I've ever seen. So we'll see if you can actually hear me over that. It's become very warm today, so I have a dewy glow about me. So let's just hope the light doesn't bounce off of my face too much. In the book, St Germain's is really important to Nathan for some unusual reasons. I'm going to read one or two parts of the novel where Nathan describes it, and every time I go to film this, I of course close the book and lose the page where it happened. Here we go. Arriving at the bridge, my feet slowed and I looked down the little gravel road on my left. St Germain's was the Catholic church, a tiny granite building about 50 yards down the pebbled path with a statue of, I presumed, St Germain looking down over the green entrance doors. I didn't stop. I wasn't even looking at it for a specific reason. It was just a habit. We didn't go to church except at Christmas, or on those few occasions we'd visit Aunt Brenda and Uncle Frank or Grandad down south, even though Mum asserted we were Catholic at every given chance. Dad would come with us, but he'd never grown up with Bibles or pictures of Jesus hanging in his house. My mum would have more of these if she could.
and always tutted and swore whenever the latest church scandal was on the news. Other than the bookshop, this little building was the only place in the village I was interested in, but not because I was like my mum. I'd always been fascinated by the little door at the side of the altar. We caught tiny peeks through it when the priest and the altar boy used it at the end of Mass, but I'd decided it led to another dimension and had written stories about it in my mind. Maybe a priest would be able to answer questions about ghosts and other things that had happened to me. So, this is the shop behind me that did used to be a bookshop many, many years ago. It's funny how differently you remember things, because in my mind it was a white building, but I think I'm confusing it with another building just down the street a bit. But now, as you can see, it's a clothes shop. But in my mind, this is where the book cover was. So I was trying to film this shot for about 10 minutes, where I was showing the main street and talking about Nathan walking to school every day to get the bus. And it's quite loud. Never have cars seemed so loud before until you start to try and film. And the thing that stopped me, ironically, was a big double-decker bus that pulled up and a bunch of school kids got off, coming home from school.
Just before the stone bridge, we slowed to a stop at a temporary set of traffic lights. There didn't seem to be anyone doing any work on the road, though, and Mum muttered something and laughed. I squinted out the window at my side. St. Germain's was at the end of the gravelled path, frozen like a painting. I gripped the knob in the car door and rolled down the window a few inches further. Beneath the rattling of the car engine, I heard voices, all singing together, a hymn rising to a crescendo. The green doors opened, and for a second I saw myself in my dream, kneeling on the bench, praying. I blinked it away, and instead the priest marched out, followed by other people, chatting and smiling like always. I slid my hand into the pocket of my cords and rubbed the onyx between my fingers. As the amber light blinked on in front of us, I reached out of the open window and dropped the secret stone on the road. The traffic lights glowed green, the colour of the heart chakra, Iris would have said. We juddered forward, rising over the hump of the bridge, and the circle floated off behind me, letting me go.